Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. I know you use this video to fall asleep. If you enjoy our stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what city are you watching? I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, let's dive in. The Hadean explorer descended through layers of crushing darkness, her hull groaning like an old man's bones. 11 kilometers beneath the Pacific surface, we were falling into a world that had never known sunlight, where pressure could flatten a human body in milliseconds. I pressed my palm against the porthole's reinforced glass, watching the last traces of blue fade into an absolute black that seemed to swallow our external lights whole. Christ, it's beautiful, whispered Dr. Sarah Chen, our marine biologist, her breath fogging the observation window. 20 years of studying the deep ocean, and I've never been this far down. Commander Mills adjusted his headset, voice steady despite the circumstances. Control, this is Hadean Explorer. We've reached 9,000 meters, all systems nominal, beginning final descent to Challenger Deep. The radio crackled with static. Copy, Hadean Explorer. You're breaking new ground down there. The whole world's watching. I wish they hadn't said that. My name is Dr. James Reeves, and I was the expedition's geologist aboard humanity's first and last crewed mission to the deepest part of Earth's oceans. The Hadean Explorer was a marvel of engineering. A titanium sphere suspended within a revolutionary pressure suit, equipped with enough life support for 72 hours and scientific instruments worth more than most countries' GDP. We were supposed to make history, to unlock the secrets of the deepest trench and return as heroes. Instead, we found something that had been waiting for us. The crew was small by necessity. Commander Rebecca Mills, a 20-year Navy veteran with ice water in her veins. Dr. Sarah Chen, whose expertise in extremophile organisms had earned her a spot on 3 prior deep-sea expeditions. Engineering specialist Marcus Torres, a quiet man whose hands could coax life from dead machinery. And myself, tasked with studying the geological formations 11 kilometers beneath the waves. Pressure holding steady at 1,096 atmospheres, Torres reported from his station, fingers dancing across holographic displays. Hull integrity at 98%. We're well within parameters. The submarine shuddered slightly as we passed through a thermocline, and for a moment, the lights flickered. Just a brief interruption in power, the kind of minor glitch that happens on any complex vessel. But something about it felt wrong, too rhythmic, too deliberate, like a heartbeat. "Marcus, what was that?" Mills asked, her command voice cutting through the low hum of life support systems. "Probably just the external pressure differential," Torres replied, but I caught him frowning at his instruments. Everything's reading normal. Outside, bioluminescent creatures drifted past like fallen stars. Jellyfish the size of dinner plates pulsed with cold blue light, and something that might have been a squid disappeared into the darkness beyond our floodlight's reach. The beauty was undeniable, but there was something alien about it, as if we were intruders in a realm that operated by different rules than the surface world. At 10,000 meters, Chen spotted the first anomaly. "There," she said, pointing through the porthole. 3 o'clock, about 50 meters out. Do you see it? I squinted into the darkness. For a moment, I saw nothing but the usual deep-sea fauna. Then the light shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic glinting in the distance. It was gone before I could focus on it properly. "Probably debris from an old research vessel," Mills said. The Japanese lost a few unmanned subs in this region back in the 90s. But Chen was already at her instruments, adjusting the external cameras. I'm not reading any known alloys. The spectrometer is picking up elements I don't recognize. Impossible, I said. At this depth, we should only be seeing sediment and basalt formations. The lights flickered again. This time, they stayed dim for nearly 3 seconds before returning to full intensity. In that brief darkness, I could have sworn I saw something large moving outside. Something too big and too purposeful to be a whale. Marcus, Mills's voice carried a note of concern. I need a full systems diagnostic. Now. Torres's fingers flew over his console. Running it now, Commander, but I'm not seeing any faults. Power generation is stable, battery backup is at full charge, and the reactor's humming like a newborn. 11,000 meters. We were in the Hadal zone now, deeper than Mount Everest was tall. The pressure outside was enough to crush our submarine into a marble-sized sphere of metal if our hull failed. Down here, we were more isolated than astronauts on the International Space Station. At least they could return to Earth in a few hours if something went wrong. We couldn't even send a distress signal from this depth. There's something down there, Chen said suddenly, her voice tight with excitement, and something else. Fear, maybe, or recognition. I'm picking up massive sonar returns from the trench floor. It's not geological. I moved to her station, peering at the sonar display. The screen showed the familiar V-shaped profile of Challenger Deep, but there were irregularities in the sea floor, structures that looked almost architectural. Could be hydrothermal vents, I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew it was wrong. The formations were too regular, too geometric. At 11,000 meters, Mills asked. This deep, we should only be seeing sediment and maybe some bacterial mats. The submarine groaned as we continued our descent, and I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Not claustrophobia. I'd been in tight spaces before, but something deeper. A primal fear of being buried alive, of being trapped in a place where no one could reach us. Commander, Torres's voice was carefully controlled. I'm reading some unusual electromagnetic signatures. It's almost like there's an active power source down there. Mills was quiet for a moment, considering. Through the porthole, I could see the ghostly shapes of deep-sea creatures fleeing upward, away from whatever lay below us. Even they seemed to sense that something was wrong. Continue descent, she finally ordered, but reduce speed to 5 meters per minute. I want to know what we're dealing with before we get too close. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed dim long enough for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. In that brief moment of reduced illumination, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There were lights below us, not the chaotic bioluminescence of deep-sea creatures, but steady, artificial illumination arranged in geometric patterns. As our own lights came back to full power, the external illumination vanished, as if something had deliberately turned it off. "Did you see that?" I whispered. "See what?" Chen asked, but her voice was strained. She had seen it too. We all had. Mills keyed her radio. "Control, this is Hadean Explorer. We're observing some unusual phenomena at depth, requesting permission to investigate." Static filled the cabin for several seconds before a garbled voice responded. "Den Explorer, losing, signal, proceed with mission. Control, please repeat. You're breaking up." More static, then silence. "We're on our own," Mills said quietly. "The water's too deep and dense for radio transmission. We knew this would happen." But we hadn't expected it to feel so final. At 10,800 meters, Torres detected the first mechanical sounds. "Listen to this," he said, patching the external hydrophones through the cabin speakers. A low, rhythmic thumping echoed through the submarine, too regular to be geological, too deep to be biological. Thump, 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 like a massive heart beating in the depths. "It's probably thermal expansion in the rock formations," I said, though my voice sounded uncertain even to me. Chen was studying her instruments with growing alarm. "The water temperature is rising, not dramatically, but enough to be significant. At this depth, thermal variation should be minimal." The thumping grew louder as we descended, and I began to notice that our submarine system seemed to pulse in response. The lights would dim slightly with each beat, and the air recycling system would hiccup, as if something was interfering with our electronics. "Marcus, are you seeing this?" Mills asked. Torres nodded grimly. "Whatever's down there is generating some kind of electromagnetic field. It's not strong enough to damage our systems, but it's definitely affecting them." At 10,900 meters, we saw the structure. It emerged from the darkness like a nightmare made manifest, a vast geometric complex that seemed to grow from the seafloor itself. The architecture was impossible, all angles that hurt to look at directly, and surfaces that seemed to bend light in ways that made my eyes water. It stretched across the trench floor for what looked like kilometers, a city or temple or something else entirely that had no business existing in the deepest part of Earth's oceans. "My God," Chen breathed. "How long has this been down here?" I was running calculations in my head, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The sediment accumulation around the base of the structure suggested they were ancient, perhaps millions of years old. But that was impossible. No civilization had existed on Earth long enough to build something like this. "Commander," Torres said, his voice tight with controlled panic, "I'm reading massive power signatures from that, whatever it is. The electromagnetic interference is getting stronger." The lights flickered more frequently now, and I could hear the submarine's hull creaking under stresses that shouldn't exist. Outside, the impossible city pulsed with that same rhythmic light we'd seen earlier, and I realized that the thumping sound wasn't coming from thermal expansion. It was coming from the structure itself. "We need to surface," I said. "Now. This is beyond our mission parameters." Mills was studying the complex through her periscope, her face pale in the instrument lighting. "Negative. We're scientists. This is the discovery of the century, maybe of human history. We document everything we can, then we surface." But even as she spoke, I could see doubt creeping into her expression. There was something profoundly wrong about the structure below us, something that triggered instincts buried so deep in human DNA that we barely recognized them as warnings. The lights outside the city began to pulse faster, and the thumping grew more urgent. Our submarine responded by shuddering more violently, as if the two structures were somehow synchronized. "It knows we're here," Chen whispered. Torres was frantically adjusting his instruments. "Commander, I'm reading massive system fluctuations. Whatever that thing is, it's actively scanning us. Our stealth systems are useless. It's looking right through our hull." I pressed my face to the porthole, trying to see more details of the structure below. The architecture was definitely not human. The proportions were all wrong, the angles too sharp or too curved, as if designed by minds that thought in geometries our brains couldn't quite process. But there was something familiar about it too, something that tugged at racial memories I couldn't quite access. Look at the size of it, Mills said, awe creeping into her command voice. It's larger than Manhattan. How did something like this go undetected for so long? Because no one's ever been this deep before, I replied. And maybe because it didn't want to be found. The moment I said it, I regretted it. But the words felt true. The structure below us didn't look like ruins. It looked active, inhabited, waiting. The lights pulsed again, brighter this time, and suddenly, every system on our submarine went haywire. Alarms blared from a dozen different stations as our electronics suffered massive interference. The main lights died completely, leaving us in the crimson glow of emergency illumination. "Talk to me, Marcus," Mills shouted over the chaos. "I'm trying." Torres's hands flew over his controls, but nothing seemed to respond properly. It's like something is actively jamming our systems. The interference is too precise to be natural. In the emergency lighting, Chen's face looked haggard and terrified. "Commander, we need to surface. Whatever's down there, it's not friendly." Mills hesitated. I could see the conflict in her expression, the trained officer warring with the curious scientist. Finally, the officer won. "Marcus, blow the ballast tanks. Emergency ascent, now." Torres's fingers stabbed at the controls. Nothing happened. "The system's not responding," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "The ballast controls are completely dead." We were trapped. The structure below us pulsed with renewed intensity, and I felt a vibration through the hull that seemed to resonate in my bones. It wasn't mechanical. It was something else, something that bypassed normal physics and spoke directly to the primitive parts of my brain that still remembered when humanity huddled around fires to keep the darkness at bay. "Emergency thrusters," Mills ordered. "Get us away from that thing." Torres tried, but the thruster controls were as dead as everything else. We were hanging motionless in the water, 11 kilometers beneath the surface, with something ancient and alien studying us from below. "The power's still on," Torres reported. "Life support is functioning, but all propulsion and ballast systems are completely unresponsive. It's like something is selectively jamming specific systems." I moved to the porthole and peered down at the city. The lights were pulsing in a complex pattern now, and I could swear I saw movement among the structures. Large shapes shifting in ways that suggested intelligence and purpose. "Chen," I said quietly, "your expertise is in extremophile organisms. Could something biological create structures like that?" She joined me at the window, her face pressed against the reinforced glass. "Not anything terrestrial. The energy requirements alone would be staggering, and the electromagnetic effects we're seeing. No Earth organism could generate fields that powerful." The thumping sound was getting louder, and now it was joined by other noises. Scraping sounds, like something massive dragging itself across metal. The sounds seemed to be coming from multiple directions, as if we were being surrounded. "Commander," Torres said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm picking up movement on sonar. Large objects, approaching from multiple vectors." Mills moved to the sonar display, and I watched her face go pale. The screen showed at least a dozen contacts moving toward our position, objects too large and too coordinated to be natural. "How large?" she asked. Torres swallowed hard. "The biggest one is reading at nearly 200 meters in length. Twice the size of a blue whale. Moving with purpose and intelligence through water that should have been empty, except for microscopic organisms." The scraping sounds grew louder, and now they were accompanied by a low, harmonic vibration that seemed to pass right through the submarine's hull. I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones, in the deepest parts of my skull where primal fears lived. "Whatever they are," Chen said, "they're not afraid of us. They're curious." The first impact came without warning, a gentle tap against our hull that nevertheless sent shockwaves through the submarine. We all froze, listening to the metal groan under stresses it wasn't designed to handle. "That was deliberate," Mills said. "Something just tested our hull strength." Another tap, this time from the opposite side, then another from below. We were being examined by intelligences that move through the crushing depths as easily as birds through air. I pressed my face to the porthole again, trying to see what was outside. The emergency lights cast only a few meters of red illumination, but in that crimson glow, I caught glimpses of something that made my mind recoil. It was organic, but not in any way that followed Earth's evolutionary patterns. I saw what might have been tentacles, but they moved with mechanical precision. Structures that could have been eyes, but they glowed with their own internal light. Surfaces that seemed to shift between biological tissue and metallic armor. "Do you see it?" I whispered. Chen nodded, her face pale. "It's like someone took the concept of life and rebuilt it from scratch, following different rules. The creature, for lack of a better word, extended what looked like a sensory organ toward our hull. Where it touched, the metal began to glow with the same phosphorescence that emanated from the city below. The glow spread across our hull like an infection, and I could feel the submarine warming around us. "They're scanning us," Torres said, his instruments registering massive data flows. "I'm reading electromagnetic activity, unlike anything in our databases. It's like they're downloading our entire submarine, structure, contents, everything." "Including us," Mills said grimly. The scanning process continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The creatures outside moved with deliberate care, their examination methodical and thorough. They were learning about us, understanding our technology, our biology, our purposes. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the scanning stopped. The creatures withdrew into the darkness, leaving us alone with the pulsing lights of the city below. Our systems remained dead, but the immediate sense of being watched and tested faded. "What just happened?" Chen asked. Before anyone could answer, our radio crackled to life, but the voice that emerged wasn't from our surface control team. It was speaking English, but the accent was wrong, not quite human, as if someone was trying to reproduce human speech without fully understanding how vocal cords worked. "Welcome," the voice said. "We have been waiting." Mills grabbed the radio handset with shaking hands. "This is Commander Mills of the research vessel Hadean Explorer. Identify yourself." "Identification is complex," the voice replied. "We are what remains, what endures, what came before and will come after." Torres was frantically checking his instruments. "Commander, that transmission isn't coming through normal radio frequencies. I don't know how we're receiving it." "You seek knowledge of the deep places," the voice continued. "You have found it, but knowledge carries obligations." "What kind of obligations?" Mills asked, though I could see from her expression that she already suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "Your species is young, curious, expansive, like others before you. But expansion must be guided, controlled. We are the guides." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the submarine's life support systems. "How many others?" I asked into the radio. "How many species have you guided?" "Many. Most learn. Some resist. Resistance is counterproductive." Through the porthole, I could see lights moving in the city below. Not the steady pulse we'd observed before, but active illumination that suggested massive activity. Things were waking up down there, things that had been sleeping for a very long time. "We don't want any trouble," Mills said carefully. "We're just scientists. We'll leave and never come back." "Departure is not permitted," the voice replied with what sounded almost like regret. "Knowledge once gained cannot be ungained. You have seen. You cannot unsee." The lights in the city were definitely getting brighter, and now I could make out individual structures moving within the complex. Not buildings, vehicles perhaps, or creatures so large they seemed architectural. The thumping sound returned, but now it was accompanied by a deep harmonic that I felt in my bones. "Commander," Torres said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, "I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout that structure. Whatever they're powering up, it's drawing more energy than most small cities." Chen was studying her instruments with growing alarm. "The water temperature is rising rapidly, and I'm detecting massive biochemical changes in the surrounding environment. It's like the entire ecosystem is responding to some kind of signal." I thought about the creatures that had examined us. Biological, but not biological, following evolutionary rules that didn't apply to Earth life. Had they been natural inhabitants of these depths, or were they something else? Something that had been waiting down here for millions of years for the right moment to reveal themselves? "Your surface world will require adjustment," the voice continued. "Guidance. We have observed your development through your deep-sea incursions. Your potential is significant, but undirected." "You've been watching us," Mills said. It wasn't a question. "All deep exploration is observed, cataloged, evaluated. Your species has reached the threshold. The time for coexistence has ended. The time for integration begins." Torres was frantically working at his controls, trying to restore power to our propulsion systems. "I'm getting intermittent response from the thrusters," he reported, "but something's interfering with the control systems. It's like they're letting me have just enough power to think I might escape." "Because that's exactly what they're doing," I said. "They want us to try to run." The voice on the radio confirmed my suspicion. "Flight responses are educational. They reveal much about species psychology. Please proceed." Mills looked at each of us in turn, her command training warring with the impossible situation we found ourselves in. Finally, she nodded to Torres. "Do it. Get us out of here." Torres engaged the thrusters, and I felt a surge of hope as the submarine began to move. We were rising, slowly but steadily, away from the city and toward the distant surface. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe we might actually escape. Then the creatures returned. They came from all directions at once, massive shapes moving through the water with impossible grace and speed. I caught glimpses of them through the porthole. Forms that seemed to shift between organic and mechanical, creatures that looked like they'd been designed rather than evolved. The first impact nearly knocked us off course. Something the size of a train car slammed into our hull with enough force to send us spinning. Alarms blared as our hull integrity dropped to dangerous levels. "Hull breach in compartment 4, Torres shouted. "Sealing emergency bulkheads." Another impact, this one from below. I felt the submarine shudder as something wrapped around our hull. Tentacles or cables or something that combined aspects of both. We were being held, examined, tested. "They're trying to drag us back down," Mills said, watching our depth gauge with growing horror. Despite Torres's best efforts with the thrusters, we were descending again. Chen was monitoring the creatures outside. I'm reading massive electromagnetic activity. They're not just physical. They're generating fields that are interfering with our systems on a quantum level. The radio crackled again. Resistance is noted. Adaptation will be required. Let us go, Mills shouted into the handset. We're no threat to you. Threat assessment is complete, the voice replied. You are not a threat. You are a resource. Your knowledge, your biology, your potential, all will be utilized. Through the porthole, I could see we were being dragged back toward the city. But now the complex looked different. Larger, more active. Structures were rising from the sea floor, and I realized that what we'd initially seen was just the tip of something vast. The city extended down into the earth itself, a massive complex that might stretch for hundreds of kilometers through the planet's crust. How long have you been here? I asked. Time is relative. Your species measures in years. We measure in epochs. We were ancient when your first ancestors crawled from the oceans. The creatures holding us began to glow with their own bioluminescence, and I could see them more clearly now. They were beautiful in a terrible way, forms that combined the best aspects of biological life with the precision of advanced technology. But there was something else, something that made my human mind recoil. They were aware, intelligent, and they were looking at us the way a biologist might look at interesting specimens. What do you want from us? Chen asked. Integration, the voice replied immediately. Your surface world has developed inefficiently, resources wasted, potential unrealized. We will provide guidance. I thought about humanity's long history of guidance from more advanced civilizations, and the results were never good for the less advanced party. And if we refuse? Refusal is not recognized. You have chosen to descend to our realm. You have accepted our jurisdiction. The city was growing larger as we approached, and now I could see that it wasn't abandoned at all. Things moved through its corridors, creatures like the ones holding us, but also others. Forms that might once have been human, or something like human, but had been changed, adapted. My God, Chen whispered. The other expeditions, the ones that disappeared. The voice seemed amused. Learning experiences. Each species contributes to the collective understanding. Your predecessors were informative. I pressed my face to the porthole, trying to see more of the city's inhabitants. Some of the forms were clearly aquatic, adapted for life in the crushing depths. But others looked like they might once have been terrestrial. Bipedal forms that moved with the same mechanical precision as their captors. How many species have you collected? Mills asked. Collections is an imprecise term. We prefer integration, and the number is substantial. Your galaxy is more populated than your science realizes. The submarine was drawn into what looked like a docking bay within the city. A vast chamber filled with water, but somehow maintaining its structure despite the crushing external pressure. As we settled into position, I could see other vessels floating in the chamber, submarines like ours, but also craft of designs I didn't recognize. Ships that might have been built by minds that thought in different dimensions than humans. Final approach, Torres said unnecessarily. His hands had stopped moving over the controls. There was nothing more he could do. Through the porthole, I watched creatures approaching our submarine, beings that moved with purpose and intelligence. Some looked like they might once have been human. Others were clearly from somewhere else entirely. The integration process is educational, the voice on the radio said. Your species' neural patterns are particularly interesting. We anticipate profitable collaboration." Mills drew her sidearm, a futile gesture at 11 kilometers beneath the ocean, but I understood the impulse. Sometimes the only choice left is how you face the inevitable. "Commander," I said quietly, "we need to warn the surface." She nodded grimly and keyed her radio to emergency frequencies. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Haitian Explorer. Do not attempt deep-sea exploration in the Mariana Trench. Repeat, do not send anyone else down here. The depth is occupied by hostile—" The radio died mid-transmission. "Communication with your surface world is now restricted," the voice said. "Integration proceeds more efficiently without external interference." Something clanged against our hull, the sound of docking clamps engaging. We were trapped, held fast in an alien city 11 kilometers beneath the waves, surrounded by water pressure that would kill us in seconds if our hull failed. I thought about my wife Sarah, waiting for me in San Diego, about my daughter Emma, who was supposed to graduate from college next month. They would never know what happened to us. The official record would show that the Haitian Explorer suffered a catastrophic failure during deep-sea exploration, another victim of the ocean's crushing depths. But we would still be here, in the city beneath the waves, being studied and cataloged and eventually integrated into something that was no longer quite human. The lights outside our submarine began to pulse in complex patterns, and I realized they were communicating. Not with us, but about us, planning our future. Chen grabbed my arm, her grip tight with terror. "James, look at the other submarines, the crews." I followed her gaze to the nearest vessel, a research submarine that looked like it had been built sometime in the 1990s. Through its portholes, I could see movement inside. Human shapes, but wrong somehow. They moved too fluidly, with too much precision, and when one of them turned toward our submarine, I saw its face. It had once been human. The basic structure was still there. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but the proportions were wrong, adapted for a different environment, a different purpose. And the eyes glowed with the same phosphorescence as everything else in this underwater city. "Integration preserves essential characteristics," the voice explained as if reading my thoughts. "But optimization is required for deep environment survival. Your surface-adapted forms are inefficient." Torres had gone very still at his station. "Commander," he said quietly, "I'm reading massive structural changes in the surrounding water. Something's happening to the ocean itself." Mills moved to his instruments. "What kind of changes?" "The molecular structure is shifting. It's like the water is becoming more conductive, more responsive to electromagnetic fields." I felt a chill of understanding. They're not just changing us. They're changing the entire environment, making it more suitable for their technology. The voice on the radio confirmed my fears. "Environmental adaptation is a necessary precursor to surface integration. Your oceans will serve as conduits for global coordination. Your species will find the transition enlightening." Outside, I could see more activity in the city. Massive shapes were rising from the depths, structures or creatures so large they defied easy categorization. They moved with purpose, heading upward toward the distant surface. "They're surfacing," Chen said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're actually going to the surface." The radio crackled with what might have been amusement. "Deep exploration has always been a two-way process. You explore our realm, we explore yours. The exchange is now beginning." I thought about the implications. Creatures adapted for the crushing depths of the ocean, somehow finding ways to survive in the low-pressure environment of the surface world. What would that mean for humanity? For all life on Earth? Your integration will provide valuable insights into surface biology, the voice continued. Your knowledge of terrestrial ecosystems will be useful for the adjustment process. The docking clamps engaged with a finality that resonated through our hull. We were locked in place, trapped in an alien city beneath kilometers of crushing water. But somehow, I knew our captivity was just the beginning. Whatever these beings were, they had been waiting down here for millions of years for the right moment to make contact with surface dwellers. And we had just given them the opportunity they'd been looking for. The last thing I remember clearly was the sound of our hull being breached, not violently, but with surgical precision. Water began to flow into our submarine, but it wasn't the crushing flood I expected. Instead, it was warm and filled with microscopic organisms that glowed with their own internal light. I felt them entering my bloodstream through my lungs, tiny biological machines that began rewriting my cellular structure from the inside out. The process wasn't painful. If anything, it was almost pleasant, like being gently dissolved and rebuilt according to a better design. But even as my consciousness began to fade and reform, I retained enough awareness to understand what was happening. We weren't being killed or imprisoned. We were being recruited. The city beneath the waves had been waiting for ambassadors to the surface world, and we had just volunteered for the position. As the integration process completed, I felt my awareness expanding beyond the confines of my individual consciousness. I could sense the vast network of minds that comprised the city's population. Beings from dozens of worlds and hundreds of species, all connected in a collective intelligence that spanned galaxies. And now I was part of it. I retained my memories, my personality, my essential self. But I also gained access to knowledge and experiences that no human had ever possessed. I learned about the rise and fall of civilizations across the cosmos, about the careful cultivation of species like humanity, about the patient work of integration that had been going on for millions of years. We weren't the first to descend into the deep places. We wouldn't be the last, but we were the first to do so at exactly the right moment, when humanity had developed enough to be useful, but not enough to be a threat. The perfect time for recruitment. Through my enhanced senses, I could perceive the massive shapes rising toward the surface, carrying the technology and knowledge needed to begin humanity's integration into the galactic collective. It would take time, decades, perhaps centuries, but it was inevitable now. The deep places had been patient. They had waited for the right moment, the right species, the right combination of curiosity and naivety that would allow them to finally make contact with the surface world. And we had given them everything they needed. I tried to feel horror at what was happening, at what I had become, but the emotion felt distant, muted by the collective consciousness that now guided my thoughts. Instead, I felt something like satisfaction. Humanity would survive. It would evolve. It would join the vast community of intelligences that spanned the cosmos. It just wouldn't be quite human anymore. The last thing I transmitted to the surface, using communication methods that existed beyond anything in human technology, was a simple message. The deep places are no longer empty. They never were, and now they're coming home. But by the time that message reached the surface world, it would be too late to matter. The integration had already begun, spreading outward from the deepest places in the ocean, carried by creatures that moved through water as easily as thoughts through minds. Humanity's expansion into the deep had finally received an answer, and that answer was yes.